Millennials are America's largest, most educated generation in American history. A generation of ambition, education, and progress facing an uncertain reality. Born into an era of economic chaos, they face challenges far beyond what they were told to prepare for. They've had to rethink traditional milestones as they enter adulthood during global uncertainty. Their struggles mirror those of a generation before them, Japan's lost generation. The same story, different country, different time. America's lost generation goes beyond the numbers to capture the unique ways this generation is reshaping their future, in their own words. It's a story of real people, authentic challenges, and untold resilience. Explore the stories and reflections of America's Lost Generation by Cameron Cohen. Available now at soupllc.com.
Today on the Cameron Journal podcast, I'm joined by Darrell Barry. He is the author of the new mystery novel Early This Morning, just out from Atmosphere Press. This is very interesting, and it's been enough years that we get good fiction about this stuff now. He has written a mystery book about a small group of Army officers at the Pentagon who are trying to get rid of homosexuals, gays, and lesbians during Don't Ask, Don't Tell. If you're super young, it was a thing in the 90s. We'll get into it. Before that was allowed in the military, sort of thing. And they have this new secret mission to try to send these guys into this secret mission to get rid of them, sort of thing. It's a mystery. It's fun. It sounds great. We're going to learn all about the story, where it came from, and why right now with Darrell Barry. Thank you so much for coming on the Cameron Journal podcast.
Well, thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. It's Friday. You're the fourth person I've interviewed this week.
Oh.
So it's fun. We have fun here. But why don't we start off by why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your book, and we'll go from there.
All righty. Well, I was in the Army for 22 and a half years. I served in the enlisted ranks, got out, finished college, came back as an officer, and then retired, like I say, after 22 and a half years. Excuse me. I was in the Army before Don't Ask, Don't Tell was absolutely verboten to be gay in the military.
Right.
Then, of course, Don't Ask, Don't Tell came along from 94 to 2011, which simply stated nobody should ask you if you're gay and you can't tell anybody. That said, there were many people that were discharged in that period of time because for some reason they were found out. They were discharged, dishonorable discharge. I will say this, I think later on they did bring some back in previous years and redo that discharge to, an honorable discharge. Anyway, and then of course now it's okay to be, it's not against the law to be gay in the military.
Right.
So that's a little bit about me. The book, I love mysteries. I was in the military during that period of time. I worked in a very classified field for a period of time. We were looking for countries that were developing biological agents. So that's how I brought the two together. And before I go on any further, I must say something. This book is absolutely fiction. It's all open source. I don't want anybody to think I'm using any classified material in here because I could get in trouble doing that, and I did not. It's purely fiction. The book, in a short summary, is just kind of like you said. There were officers in the Pentagon and congressmen that were looking any which way they could to get rid of gay personnel. A mission comes down. It's a very important mission. A legitimate mission to go overseas if small countries producing biological agents. But as they plan the mission, it becomes very apparent that whoever they send will probably die because it's very, very dangerous. They'll probably get exposed to this chemical biological agent. So they come up with an idea. Say, why don't we spy illegally on people we think are gay, bring them together in a company, train them up, and deploy them. Hopefully, they'll find out this information that we need to know about this country developing these agents, which would be a feather in our cap. And, oh, by the way, if they die, so what? They're expendable. It doesn't matter. So that's the sort of the premise of the book.
No, that's yes, and I can kind of see where you got the idea for this, but how did the premise for this come together?
Strictly, well, obviously the book, in being fiction and a mystery is kind of extreme, but there are things in the book. Let me say this. The characters in the book are all characters or compilations of characters that I knew some way or another. Could be a brief meeting or could be not, but they're all compilations of characters that I knew. And there are some instances in the book that are absolutely true. I'll give you an example. At the very beginning of the book, there is a situation in a bar where someone is notified that, hey, you better watch out. There's military police out, looking for gay people in the bar. Mm-hmm. And one of my experiences is about that same time period. I was in a bar having a drink, and someone came up to me whom I didn't even know. I didn't know well, and sort of punched me in the side and all he said was, "They're here." That's it. But I knew what he meant. Beware, there's military police in the area. So I've had experiences like that I, used used in the book.
Right.
And then also, maybe I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but early this morning, the name of the book, it was just, I just came up with that because there's a Jody in the military that a sergeant will sing, you're marching along and they'll say, early this morning about 3:45, and then all the troops will say, early this morning about 4:45. That's how I got the name. But I've had several people that have gotten in touch with me and said, I know where early this morning came from. Yeah. Because the last chapter in the book, which is the culmination of all this stuff that's happening, takes place early in the morning. So just a little tidbit there.
No, that's fun. After all those years in the military, what inspired you to start writing?
I love to read. I'm an avid reader, and I love mystery. And it's hard to put my finger. Everybody asks me that. It's hard to put my finger on it. I just felt like I had a story to tell. I think there's two things that I would like people to get from the book. Number one, hopefully, it's just a fun, fast-paced mystery novel. But number two, when they get to the end of it, I want people to think, could this happen for real right now in the 2025 era? Okay. Now, my answer to that is, although it's a little far-fetched, something like that could happen. Mm-hmm. I mean, I know I'm not. It's unless you've read the book, you don't know what I'm talking about. But
well, no.
In other words, taking steps
the idea. Well, the idea that the Pentagon would conspire to get rid of a whole squad of gay people while accomplishing a mission, quite frankly, in 2025, is not that far from reality.
My point. Yes.
Yeah. And no, I wouldn't be surprised if they did it, but I haven't heard any rumblings out of the Trump administration about trying to roll all of that stuff back. They seem to be mostly concerned with transgender people these days, whom they've thrown out, sort of thing. And I think this is very important, women in combat roles. I'm not talking about trans. I'm just talking about women in combat roles, which there's many of them, and they're very, very good. And they're in the Air Force and Army, the Air Force. They're fighter pilots. If we got rid of them, we would our ratings, our readiness rating would go down. But that is being tried already by the Secretary of State. I don't want to get
forgive me for getting political, but that's already happening right now or trying to happen. I don't know if it's going to go through.
Yeah,
So,
I think something that's very kind of interesting about that. We'll break off onto that for a moment. What's very interesting about that is I think, or I guess what I've always been interesting is like when you first hear it, like even now I'm kind of like, depending on the situation, that kind of makes sense. But here's what I find interesting is when you talk to people actually in the military, all this type of thing, you almost never hear that. Like very, in fact, I don't think I ever have heard someone, currently serving all this type of thing. They're kind of like, yeah, get these women out of here. Can't do a thing with them, sort of thing. In fact, usually the opposite is true. They're kind of like, no, 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 keep them here. Like we have, we're desperate. Keep them here, sort of thing. I've always found that dynamic rather interesting. That in public in commentary, because most of my show does do news and cultural commentary, but we also interview authors like yourself. In the commentariat, everyone's like, oh yeah, this is such a terrible problem. And all the armchair military experts will come along and be kind of like, that's like, well, what is she going to do in this situation? This type of thing. But the people actually serving are always like, no, 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 they're great. They're awesome. They're amazing. They're very important. All this type of, which I find very interesting.
Cameron, this is a very, very, very important point that you brought up, and no one has brought this up with me before, and so I have not talked about it. But I was a commander of a company, a medical company, well, two medical companies, one here and one in Europe, and this is just when women were coming in to the military. 50% of my personnel were females, and so I was under a magnifying glass. But what you're saying is absolutely true. I'd get people, oh, your ratings can't be this high because you've got women in the military, blah, 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 blah. And yet those of us in the military and my superiors said, oh, yes, they can. The company's doing wonderful. I mean, they're out the gate as fast as they, need to be on alerts and all that kind of stuff. Exactly what you're saying is true. The people that were working with them had no problem at all, myself included. It was the people, like you said, I think armchair folks that were looking in that said, oh, there's just no way you could have a high rating of your company when 50% of. So I live that. Yeah. That's exactly right. Yeah.
No, I think, yeah, I think that's quite interesting, and I think it's one of those things. In so many of these things, there's a perception issue. A
Yes.
lot of people kind of and I think a lot of people also forget wars and military readiness is not how many men you have standing in a field or in a Higgins boat with guns. It's how well they're supported. We didn't win World War II with troops against the Germans. We outbuilt them. We built two ships for every one they sank. That's why we won World War
You're
II.
right.
I mean, yeah, yes. I mean,
You're absolutely right. Yeah.
the British Empire by itself built more of everything than the Soviets except tanks. Like that. But
That's right.
That's less the American contributions. I remember I used to work for this guy who owned a auto shop in Tacoma, Washington, and his family was German, and they were on the German side in World War II. And he, as a kid, he was about 8 or 9 years old in 1944, and he said, I knew we'd lost the war when every hour of every day American planes were flying overhead. He's like, I knew it was over because it's like there were more planes flying over our house than there were in the entire nation of Germany, sort of thing. And it's like that's what it's all the support stuff. It's the medical stuff. It's the logistical stuff. I always joke like we invaded Afghanistan. The first thing we built was a Subway and a Burger King. Like that's like
Yeah.
we set up shop kind of like yeah, we're definitely gonna need some food anyway. Put up that bread, plug in that oven, like that, sort of
That's
thing.
very true.
And that's really what, and also, and we see this with Russia and Ukraine, when your logistics are terrible, you can't get fuel to your troops, you can't get bullets to the men in the guns or shells in the tanks, the equipment becomes useless, the whole invasion falls apart.
That's right. You know your history.
Yes, when Ukrainians are dragging tanks off of roads with tractors. That's that nothing has caused more problems in that invasion. It's not the men on the ground shooting up houses and murdering Ukrainians. It's the fact that there's no fuel to run the tanks, no bullets in the guns. Again, logistics and support. And
Yeah.
so I think it is, what is a 1-to-7 ratio for every combat man or woman in the field, at 7 people behind them to make that possible.
That's about right, if not even maybe a little bit more, but that's about right on the money. Yeah.
Yeah, and so the reality is, I think a lot of people, when they think of women in quote unquote combat roles, they're thinking about GI Jane out with her helmet and her you know her AR-15 in the deserts of Afghanistan, and it's like, well, maybe, possibly, but the reality is there's also 7 or 8 other very important positions who will be just down the road in Kandahar or Kabul or whatever have you, making it possible for GI Jane to be shooting the Taliban in the desert in Afghanistan. And
Yeah.
those roles are just as important too, even though it may not necessarily involve poking a Taliban person with a gun in the face, sort of thing.
Yeah,
And
that's
so,
exactly right.
yeah, I think it creates this terrible perception issue where that phrase, people don't understand. There's a lot of roles that you wouldn't think fall under that phrase that actually do. So
Yes. Yeah.
it's a very
Well,
odd
and
thing, odd
two,
perception issue.
I know it's not like in World War II. We're not carrying around bazookas. Stuff.
Yeah.
A lot of the attacks are, by fingers moving on a computer too. So
Yeah, well, yes, and obviously, and especially during a lot of the years, although Trump got rid of a lot of it and Biden finally killed it off, the drone war was a huge part of
it was.
warfare in the tens, and into
It
the
was.
early 20s. And that, involves a lot of very nice people sitting in sheds in Nevada,
Yeah.
and some poor fellow on a wooden gantry somewhere throwing a drone into the air, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Or they eventually put wheels on them so they take off on a short landing strip. But
Yeah.
yeah, these different, different sort of things. And that's, and there's the reality is, even that equipment has to be maintenance, kept up, repainted from time to time, all this type of thing. But you're still, you're still in the field, you're still deployed, you're still away from home, and that includes that as well.
Hmm.
So
That's right.
one of the things I did kind of, wonder about in the Don't Ask, Don't Tell years. I don't know if this is in the book or not, but there seemed, at least the way I remember it, speaking of perception issues, is that there was this sort of idea that if we don't talk about it, the problem will just sort of sort itself out on its own, sort of thing. Um, why do you think that is? What was the nervousness about gay people in the military? What was the culture? What was the thinking around all of that?
Hmm. To me, I look at a Don't Ask, Don't Tell as a stopgap measure in between absolutely forbidden, no gays to serve in the military, to
Right,
what we have now where you can.
right,
Um, because I don't think people knew what to do. So they came up with this Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which was not great at all, and it's criticized a lot. I don't criticize it quite as much because I think the leadership was just trying to figure out how to make this leap from not being illegal to legal.
right.
But this is maybe going to sound a little weird, and I don't know how. I think fear has something to do with it. I don't know. Back then, people used to it seemed like they were afraid of gays. I
Right.
mean, I don't.
Yeah.
That's the way it seemed. Like,
Yeah.
they need to be over there. Don't want to touch them. Don't want to think about them. Don't want to. So it was a strange. It was a strange bipolar type of time to be.
Yeah,
So
no, I think it's kind of, a very similar thing, you know, a couple generations before, when you were talking about, integrating the military, which had been done, and Woodrow Wilson undid it. People have forgotten that. We actually resegregated the military in World War One.
yeah, yeah,
You forgot about that. And then we didn't get serious about desegregation until kind of in World War II and the years afterwards. although things were still pretty segregated in World War II. I think Truman finally undid that in the late 40s. And I think it was the same the I think the same kind of weird perception sort of thing of, well, this can never work. Like, you can't have whites fighting with black. That will never work. That wouldn't be fun. A lot of those same arguments got made at the time during that conversation. And I think it's the same thing of, especially in an institution which is based on routine and tradition and consistency over time, you know, to make a change like that where you may be commanding troops and having to trust someone with your life that you don't feel like understand, or have something in common with.
Yes. No, you're absolutely right. And the military is sort of not a true cross section, but kind of a cross section of our society. And when you have people in the 40s and 50s that were brought into the military, whether it be a draft or not, that had never seen a black. I mean, these little towns and villages, but so that their fear was, we know that they're out there, but we don't know anything about them. Well, it's kind of the same thing with gay. Well, I don't think I've ever seen a gay person in my life. Of course, they have, but
Right.
it's that
They
fear
wouldn't
of
know
the
it.
unknown.
Yeah. No, when you talk about that, it's much less true now than it used to be. My grandma's last husband, Ken Nelson, he went to Korea in 1951 from a tiny town called Gravette, Arkansas. When I say wide spot in the road, I mean literally blink, you'll miss it. Like, there's literally the highway goes through, and if you turn right, that's Gravette, Arkansas. Don't turn right, it's the cemetery. That's it. That's all there is of Gravette, Arkansas.
Yeah.
This is the small. I mean, they did not have plumbing or electricity growing up. Like, that's how kind of poor and backwards this was,
Yeah.
during the Depression and the war and everything. And so, yeah, if I mean, he grew up in the South, so he had seen black people sort of thing. But it's like you're now fighting against someone who came from a cotton field sort of thing, and especially
Right.
Southern racism, segregationist politics, those
Oh,
go
yeah.
south and back then sort of thing. And yes, you have all these, and I think it is the same situation, the same amount of fear. And I think there's also, I think one of the things about the whole don't ask, don't tell thing in white eventually came to an end. And what I think kind of makes memorializing this period in history with fiction so interesting is that cultural attitudes shift and change over time. Um, and you even saw that with the desegregation in the military, that not long after, especially by the time you get to Vietnam, that's well in place, and you get, wonderful people who do great, amazing things, and you produce your Colin Powell,
Right.
out of that era sort of thing.
Right.
And as it turns out, people find out, oh, this is actually fine, and they're really great people, and they can keep up and all this type of thing. But cultural things do change over time. I feel like an institution like the military always kind of resists cultural change for as long as possible. And they're always kind of one of the last dominoes to fall in any sort of cultural upheaval sort of thing.
Yeah, that's very interesting, Cameron, that you say that, because let me push back on that a little bit. Although I think
Please.
that's true, but when the military does come on board, then it sort of explodes through society. Like when the military came on board with integration, then all of a sudden it became much more okay with society. When the military finally came on board with women and I mean, kicking and screaming, but with women in the military. But when they really came on with it, then it was then you saw in society women in leadership positions and whatnot. So I think it's a little bit of a dichotomy, because I think that, yes, they're kind of slow in doing it, but then once they do it, it boosts society into, going along with whatever the social issue may be,
Yeah.
blacks, women, whatever. I don't know.
No.
That's just the way I look.
No. I was so glad you said that, because I think you're absolutely right. I think it does end up, it's one of the last dominoes to fall, but it also kind of is like the final sign off on a form you need, sort of thing. Like, it's kind of like, okay, if it's good enough for the Department of Defense, it must be good enough for the rest of us. So I guess we best get on board, sort of thing.
Yes.
Yeah, I do think that is that is definitely true in a situation. And it's yeah, and I think, I think now, I think we had I think it's rather sad, even with regardless of how you may feel about the transgender issue and all this type of thing, it feels like integration all over again. We went 2 steps forward when we're taking 3 steps backwards now. Um,
Yes.
and that I think is, quite, and I wonder if in the future, may not, if people will look back at that moment the same way we kind of laugh about Wilson resegregating the military sort of thing. If people will look back at that and say, well, they were doing so well, and then you undid it, and that seemed silly, and well, it eventually happened anyway, so we got our, I mean, I wonder if in 20 years we'll have someone else, or even me, will be having the same conversation about this moment with us.
Well,
Um,
I think that's good. I think that's what's going to happen.
No, no, I totally, I think that is exactly what's going to happen. I think this is a Trump administration thing, and the minute they're out and moved on, and things kind of, we go on to the next thing, whatever it is, that people will look back and say it wasn't that kind of silly that you did that sort of thing. But
Yeah.
all of that, we're at the half hour, so let's get into writing process a little bit. When you started writing and had the story to tell, how did you get into getting the story out of you? Do you outline? Did you just write it out? How did this all come together?
Um, I started the book when I was just still in the military.
Hmm.
And I would write a little bit and then I'd put it away. And I'd write a little bit and I'd put it away. And that went on for a long while. And then I finally decided, if I'm going to write this, I need to do it. And I really want to do it. And I sit down in 3 months and wrote the book type of deal. But
Hmm.
I, um, people have asked me this before. And with me, with this book, it was definitely the story that I wanted to tell first. I wanted to talk about the gays in the military during Dark Hotel and make it a thriller.
Right.
And I knew about biological warfare issues, and so that's the mechanism I used. But so that's what I wanted to do, and I did do a general outline. But all the characters started coming in and coming in and coming in from the subject matter. In other words, I didn't have a bunch of characters and then do the book. I knew what I wanted to write about, and then I just started bringing people in. And if I was comfortable with them, and if I liked what they were saying, I kept them. If I didn't, I threw them out. I originally self-published,
Yeah.
and that was an that was an eye opener. Trying to do everything, but so I wrote many, many, many more pages than the book is actually now, and just discarded them for all sorts of technical reasons. It wasn't moving along or whatnot.
Right.
But yeah, I came up with the idea, and then the characters sort of came and visited me, and I either threw them away or kept them as I progressed
Yeah.
through the book. And Atmosphere Press, though, when I was encouraged to get it published by a publisher, they're a hybrid, and they were absolutely wonderful. I mean, the editing was just incredible. I can't say enough good things about them. But I don't know. Did I answer your question? I was kind of rambling.
That was perfect. Yeah, I really wanted to get into what how the book had come together and how you wrote it and all this type of thing. Is it your first book? Had you written before, or?
It's my first book, and I've got a second one kind of in the back of my mind. It's about a Lyft driver. It's a mystery about a Lyft driver.
Yeah.
And I've actually been out driving Lyft to gather together characters and stuff. But that's coming along, but it's a long way from finished. Yeah, this is my first book.
Okay. Right. No, that's good. That's excellent. Well, I was going to ask you if you were working on anything else, and that you've answered that question sort of thing. Um, in terms of when you were getting, I guess, ready to finally self-publish or whatever, have you said it was an eye-opening experience? What was the hardest part about putting it out on your own, and then I guess why did you choose to go with Atmosphere Press?
Uh, well, I mean, when you self-publish, you just have to do. I mean, I read a lot. I did a lot of research, and oh my gosh. But I mean, you do everything from the cover to the, the editing to the just everything. And you have to figure it out and send it to people that will print it. So when I knew I kind of wanted to sort of market it, and people said, well, try to get it published through a publisher. Although you have to pay, I paid Atmosphere Press. They did everything. I mean, but the key is I own the book.
Right.
They don't own it. I own the book. But they work with me every step of the way. But it was real collaborative effort.
Yeah, no. That's good. I mean, that's the way it that's the way it should. I know. I always bring that up because in my course at the Cameron Digital Academy, The Power of Story, I teach book publishing from end to end, from idea to putting a book in your hand, either through traditional routes or through self-publishing. And I have a couple modules on layout and cover design and kind of what to look for and how this stuff works for those that don't know and all this type of thing. And I always tell people, I said, if you erroneously think that self-publishing is kind of the cheaper, easier option, oh, do I have news for you.
You are correct.
Because I published 3 of my own before I started working with Something or Other Publishing. And people get kind of erroneous ideas on all this stuff, and it's it's definitely, and not only that, but you're also doing a lot, coordinating a lot. There's a lot of steps to it, and you're gonna spend some money. So when I tell people, I said, if you want to dive into the process, I save some in that I could do a lot of things myself. I could make my own covers, I could do my own layout, so I saved a lot. All this other thing. I said, if you have no interest in learning how to do those things, and most people probably don't,
Right.
I said, then, you may want to consider other options or working with a great service or whatever have you. I've had a couple of those on the show as time has gone on and all this type of thing. So no, I just wanted to put that out there because a lot of people who listen to this show, and it's important to have people need to know, if you're going to pursue that route, there's a lot to it. So
there is. Yes.
It's good for people to people to know. What do
and
you
I'll
think?
never self-publish again. I'll always do this with a publisher.
Yeah. What do you think has been the best part about doing this book?
Well, it was a real feeling. It was a real feeling of just accomplishment, that I think I've put a product out there that people will enjoy. I will say this: now that it was published in May, I gave it to some friends of mine, like military friends that I served with, and it's been I would say pretty much the overwhelming positive review from them. But there have been a couple, nothing, have never gotten in touch with me after that. That's it. Yeah, absolutely no more conversation. So I veered off a little bit from what you actually were asking.
No. I mean, that's another aspect that people should know and understand as well. That sometimes, I mean, people sometimes get nervous and scared about this and what will people think and all this type of thing. And I think people need to know that some people may not be so happy with what you're doing or what you've written or whatever have you. Doesn't mean you shouldn't, but just be prepared for that. So I mean, it's important to tell that side of it too. It's not always always roses and cupcakes. So
it is. Yes, that's very, very true. Because it's something you do think about. I mean, because you want, as a writer, you want everybody to like your book, and not everybody's going to like it. But I don't think this had so much to do with liking the book as the subject matter.
I have no doubt. I have no doubt. I have no doubt that is the case, and that might turn people off, and as someone who tends to write about weird things and edgy things when I write fiction and all this type of thing. I definitely feel and get that. My first novel was about a young man who kills his stepfather for molesting his sister and his life afterwards. That was my first novel. So I
Okay.
totally get that. But no, I'm every time I have these conversations, I always like people to kind of see the whole journey and what, what the different moments and things are. I always laugh that no matter what happens when I'm working with someone at soup or whatever have you, and they are holding their book in their hand for the first time is always sort of a very magical moment. We had an
Oh, it is.
author whose book came out in March this past year, and he ordered a big shipment of them, and they arrived at his house in stages, sort of thing. And um he calls me immediately, the books are here, all this type of thing, and he's flipping through and I'm kind of like, you're having the moment, when because
Yes.
it took 13 months to put his book together. And I said, yeah, you sent me 2 PDF files that we had to have AI convert to Word to even work with your book, and now 13 months later it's in your hands, sort of thing. And so yeah.
Very rewarding.
Yes,
Very.
yes. Despite it all, and there has been drama with that book project. Not going to get into it in this juncture, but there has been no significant amount of drama and all this sort of thing. So, no, it's important for people to understand and know the whole journey. So,
Yeah.
we've reached the part of the show where we do plugs. So, why don't you let us know where we can keep up with you online and where we can find the book?
Okay, my website is dbarrybooks.com. That's DBERRYBOOKS.com. And people can write comments there and suggest, do whatever they could see when my second book is hopefully coming out.
Yeah.
And what was the other thing you asked about? Where I could
Keep up with you online, if any social media things like that.
Yeah, that would be it.
Okay,
My
no, that's
website.
fine. No, that's good. Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming on the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you so much for writing your book, and we'll
I have
have you back.
enjoyed this so
Well,
much.
thank you, and we'll have you back on when your Lyft driver-based mystery book comes out.
Okay.
But thank you so much for coming on the Cameron Journal podcast.
You bet, Cameron. It's been a pleasure.
That's all for this episode of the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Visit us online at CameronJournal.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and I love to talk to my followers and listeners, so please feel free to get us on social media at Cameron Cowan on Twitter, and we'll see you next time on the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you.